Are your officers in danger now, or do they tend to run?
No, that's why you'll see there will always be policemen on the outskirts to monitor if there's anyone that might come out from the flats trying to attack us here.
Now, there are three gangs that operate in this area: the Jesters, the Americans. The streets are tense. 5 shootings in the past few days is higher than normal, but not unheard of. Operation Combat is damage control.
How many?
1, 2.
Highly trained officers scour the Cape Flats day and night, often acting on specific intelligence, sometimes just dealing with what comes. Now, the borders are set and they change block by block. So, for example, you'll have the Americans on this side fighting a constant turf war with the notorious hard livings on the other. Now, that's violence that plays out often in broad daylight, but under cover of night, it worsens.
Shoot them, anybody don't like mongrel, always type like how we say.
Baklay was I mean, sir. And I'm like dirty basses that are mongrel. I'm not going
That's what's the mongrel thing. As a mongrel. This is the best thing in the whole world. They don't fight us, they love us.
They fight for what they love.
Het mag misschien snaaks klinken, maar at least als daar een klein beetje orde tussen die bendes, hulle eerste wette ze maak en doen nie. As baie tens, ja, hoe hulle hele paar mense doodgesteek. Ek gaan by die target area en identify die ticket. Ek hang uit op 'n hotspot. Ek luister vir hulle uit en ek try om hulle op 'n cooldown te kan bring.
Shut up, look at your daddy.
This is the guy that make me a mongrel. And today the guys that do this lives upside down really. I did almost do it. En ek moet nie vir jy hoor dit nie, want die liewe wat ons sal liewer as jy hoor dit die wat daar wat ek is. Ek weet hy sal sy message sou wees. All I can love, I want to love my life. Make it sense to my kids. All because of you.
Welcome back to my channel, and thank you very much for joining me here again today. The last time we spoke about the case of Anton Bouwer and whether he is guilty or not. And if you haven't seen that video, I'll link it up here for you. But today we're going to talk about something that runs rife pretty much in the whole of South Africa, and I'm pretty sure around the world as well. In the Western Cape where I grew up, we have some of the most notorious gangs, specifically the numbers gangs, such as the 26, 27s or 28s. But there are, of course, other gangs that are running around in South Africa that may not be as well known to people, but really terrorize the people that they do come in contact with. And that is where our focus is going to be today. And with that being said, let's get into today's case.
Intended for mature audiences only.
South Africa as a whole has many gangs, and we've spoken about this before on this channel. And there are prison gangs who operate within the prison, but also have their feelers out in the streets as well. And a lot of the gangs who run inside the prison have a lot of feedback coming from people on the street. They are fed a lot, and some of the most powerful gangs run from inside a prison. The networks of gangs are vast, and they are very loyal and strict with one another and what the rules are within the gang. And I mention this because when we say the 28s are one of the number gangs, they are incredibly big, widespread, mostly within the Western Cape, but definitely have their feelers out within the rest of South Africa as well. But I bring this up because for today's gang that we're going to talk about, I would say that the word gang is loosely used because they are a group of men who decided to commit these horrible crimes, but they do not have specifically the loyalty, the structure, as well as some of the rules that gangs follow. And I say that as well with a pinch of salt because it's not like gangs are law-abiding citizens, but you get the point. And the gang that we're going to talk about today has people or leaders that ran independently within the gang. So they not only did what they wanted to do with their members of the gang, but they also did their own work as well. And I just want to plant a little seed or a little nugget in the brain as we go through this case, because I want you to think of your home. And I hope that for many of you, a home was a safe place, a place of warmth, love, memories, and that a lot happened. You grew up there, whatever it may be. I want you to foster those good feelings that happened in your home, because what we're going to talk about is when people breach that barrier of safety that we have in our home, this changes our perception of what is safe and where we can go to feel safe anymore, especially when people force themselves into our safe space. And that is where we're going to go with this case today. So that being said, in 2007, a group named the Razor Gang came into fruition. The gang was named after one of the leaders' nicknames, and Raymond grew up in extreme poverty. He grew up with a father who didn't want any of his children. He didn't even want his partner, his lover. So at a very young age, Raymond and his siblings and his mother were kicked out on the street by their father. Not only this, but Razor grew up with a lot of beatings that were shown by his father towards his mother. His father also turned on him and his siblings as well. So there was a whole lot of abuse that was happening, as well as being kicked on the street as a child and having to fend for themselves. And not soon after on the street, he did turn to the gang life. And this may be because there was nowhere else for him to go. There was no food coming in. His mom had to try and find work to feed his brothers and sisters. And it was very difficult to find somewhere that felt anywhere near home. But the Razor Gang, they were known for their extreme violent outbursts, their violent burglaries. And at the most, this gang was around 8 members strong. However, they usually operated between 4 and 5 members in any burglary that they did. So the MO, or the modus operandi of this gang, was that they would wait outside lurking, watching families. And they would wait outside, they would creep around. And then once the family was settling into bed, just before they turned those beams on or those burglar alarms on and closed the sliding doors with the security gates or the burglar bars, they would then make their move. So once the Razor Gang gained entry into someone's home, they would then beat the living daylights out of whoever the occupants were, so that the people inside would fork out information of where the jewels were, where the valuables were, so that the Razor Gang were in and out. They just wanted to be quick. They didn't want any faffing around, so they beat anybody and anyone, including children, women, whoever, it doesn't matter, so that they could get the information out of them, so that they could rob them and get out of there. How they would come to find these homes and how they would start off their burglaries would be completely random until they started to get smarter, harder, and they would become really street smart in the way that they would then burgle homes. And just like the Crowbar Gang, which is notorious in the Western Cape, and I've had family that's personally affected by this, and it's absolutely horrendous to hear that your loved ones have been affected by the Crowbar Gang. But to mention the Crowbar Gang is that they sit and they wait. They watch the people in the homes. They watch what cars are leaving. They watch how many people are in the homes, when and what times people leave. And this is what the Razor Gang started to do as well. But not only this, the Razor Gang also had someone who was a taxi driver, and he would then pick up people on the daily. He would speak to a whole lot of different people. But this taxi driver who was part of this gang would mostly talk to women in the taxi, and he would ask them specific questions. He would first start very friendly, very chatty, and then he would start asking specific questions. And it was a very casual conversation, so it wasn't this obvious. So not only were these women unknowingly giving information to the Razor Gang for them to target these homes, but some of the women would get into conversation with this taxi driver and voluntarily give information to the taxi driver to feed to the Razor Gang so that they could get a cut of whatever they found inside the homes. So Parkview and Sandton were one of the main areas that the Razor Gang would work in, I guess you could say, or that they would patrol and they would rob. And starting as early as 2007, by the time that the incident happened that we're going to talk about, there had been 16 different incredibly violent robberies that were done by the Razor Gang. And this incident that we're going to talk about happened in an area called Craighall Park, and it happened in September of 2007. So by the 9th month of the year, already 16 violent burglaries had happened, and this is when they stumbled upon the case that we're going to get into now. So in this home lived a man named Michael Thompson, and he lived with his wife and 3 children. He had 3 children, all under the age of 12, I think with the oldest being 11 turning 12, and he had 2 girls and 1 boy. Michael worked in the IT industry and he absolutely loved his job, but he more so loved his family. He was very much a family man. He loved being with his family. He loved spending time with his family. And they had a very welcoming and happy home. Not only was he close with his family, but his love and passion would also spread out into his work. And so many people appreciated Michael, his personality and his kindness. Then, on Thursday, the 27th of September 2007, it was a quiet spring evening with a chance of rain. So as the Thompson family was lying in the main bed, all watching a movie, the children started heading to bed. With tired eyes, they stumbled through the home, climbing into their bed. Then Lorna, who's Michael's wife, gives him the signal that she's also ready for bed. So Michael then starts getting ready for bed as well, but he happens to pan outside, and in their bedroom is a really big glass sliding door. So Michael happens to look out the sliding door and he notices that their pool water is at the brim, and Michael knows that, okay, it's going to keep raining and raining, and eventually this pool limit is going to overflow. So he thinks, okay, before I head to bed, let me just quickly go outside in the garden and just backwash the pool so that it can pump some of the water out so that the rain can then go into the pool and not flood overnight. So as the children are in bed, Lorna then pulls the blankets up and she then gets comfortable for the night. Michael then heads outside and he walks around to where the pool pump is and he starts doing what he needs to do with the backwashing system. So as Michael is walking towards the pool pump, in the corner, in the shadows, in the dark, are 4 men just watching Michael and his every move. They are inside his property in the shadows. Michael then feels that something isn't right, so he looks up from the pump, and as he turns around to look towards the shadows of his home, he then sees 2 men running towards him. Now, before we go any further, these 4 men that were inside Michael's home or inside his property were the Razor Gang, and they were not there to actually target Michael Thompson's home at all. They were there because they wanted to gain access to his neighbor's home, who a domestic worker had tipped off about what was inside the home, and that's why they were there. So they were actually trying to gain access to the neighbor's home, but they couldn't get through the gate, so they thought that maybe they could climb over Michael's wall and gain access by climbing onto something over into their property. But as this was all happening, Michael then stepped out to go towards the pool pump. So like I said, as Michael turns around, he notices 2 guys running towards him, and one guy then takes out a gun and shoots Michael straight in the lung. But Michael is a big guy and he has a lot of adrenaline flowing. He knows that these men are coming here and they're going to kill him. And he had full throttle fight mode going. So he gets up, he's got a punctured lung, but he gets up and he starts fighting the 2 men that are trying to kill him. Some of the articles said that Michael was really well trained or quite a confident mixed martial artist, or he did some kind of sport in that sense where he was able to then punch one of these 2 men who were coming to kill him, and he knocked him out cold. So the one guy fell to the floor and the other guy's now looking at him all dumbfounded because he didn't expect that. And the guy who was left now, he then took out a screwdriver and he starts stabbing Michael as many times as he can. Michael then grabs around him and these 2 start arguing. They then fall over and roll into the pool, and this guy continues to stab Michael, stab him, and again and again. And in total, Michael was stabbed 14 times with a screwdriver, but he was still going. He was fighting for his life, and he almost had this guy with a screwdriver because he kept holding him and pushing his head under the water, and he was going to kill him. But then as this is all happening, the other 2 men, because there were 4 men in total, ran towards the sliding door that was open where Lorna was sleeping. So 2 men have entered via the sliding door while this commotion is going on. And one of the men then told Lorna to shush and to keep quiet. But then one of the 2 men that are inside the home already hears the commotion on, and he hears the guy screaming with a screwdriver, "Help me, help me." And so one of the guys then steps outside. He then takes out his gun and he points it straight at Michael and shoots him straight in the head, and he dies on the spot. And then at the same time that all of this was happening, the guy who was knocked out cold gets up, and the guy who's in the pool who was fighting with Michael then gets out of the pool, and all of the men, all 4 of them, are now in the bedroom staring at Lorna. And Lorna would describe these men as she saw them. So for example, she noted that one man was very kind, and one of the men who came in to the room originally with one of the men who shot Michael One of those men was named as the kind one because he was said to be very kind. He was gentle with Lorna, and later on we'll get into that more. But she also noted the nasty one, and she said that this nasty one was awful. She said that he often bullied everybody to do the things that he wanted them to do. He was shouting at them, hitting them, and he was just incredibly nasty. Lorna did ask where her husband was, and they just said, don't worry, he's sleeping, don't think about him. So even though Lorna was worried about Michael, she had other things to focus on right now, because when these men got into the home, they quickly ran through the home and picked up two of the eldest children, so Michael's one daughter and his son, and dragged them into the room where Lorna was. And the reason why Lorna described one of the men as nasty is because Michael and Lorna's son was young, he's a child, and she said that the nasty one would often pick him up and also hit him with the gun and force him around the house, asking him, where's the valuables, where are they, I'm going to hurt you if you don't tell me where they are. He really picked on their son. So after hours of ransacking the house and taking everything they could carry, Lorna and the children were shoved face down on the ground, and they were told that one man would stay behind, and if they called for help, he would kill them. Lorna would also describe, remember we now noted that there was the kind one, the nasty one, and she also said that she noticed that another man who came into the room, she called him the wet one, and we can assume that that is the one that was in the pool with Michael, who stabbed him multiple times with a screwdriver. So the Thompson family are all face down, scared, and they didn't move. Eventually, Lorna said that she had enough. She said that she needs to protect her children and she needed to take action. So she lifted her head quietly, looking around, and then she got herself up, and they all then helped to untie each other. Lorna then gathered the children and she crept through the home looking for Michael. Lorna didn't see Michael, so she kept trying to look for him, but she knew that she had to get the children out of the house. She then ushered the children outside towards the neighbor's home so that they could leave. As she was doing this, she then slowly looked back towards the pool, and she saw Michael at the bottom of the pool, surrounded in his blood. Her entire world stopped, but she knew that she had 3 terrified children that she would need to protect. So she told them to keep their heads down and to not look up, because she did not want them to remember their father at the bottom of the pool in a cloud of his own blood. She then hurried them out, and they went to the safety of their neighbor's house, where they called the police. So while Lorna was at the neighbor's home, she also called Alan and Debbie. Alan and Debbie are incredibly important in this story because Debbie would be one of the people who would continue Michael's legacy, but Debbie and Alan are Michael's siblings. And Alan, Michael's brother, when he went to the home, he said that the crime scene was just an absolute mess. He knew from what the police were saying that the family couldn't go into the home or get anything because they had to wait for the forensic team to get there to be able to take fingerprints. However, Alan said that when he went to where his brother was just murdered, the home where there were so many memories, it was covered in police officers. And he knew that there would be a lot of police officers, but he said that there were so many just walking in and out, not wearing any protective footgear, not wearing any gloves, picking up things, touching things, taking photos of things on their phones, allegedly. And Alan was really, really disturbed by this. And one of the things that the Crime Stoppers or the Neighborhood Watch kind of would have to tell police to do was to take Michael's wedding ring off and his watch, so that they could give this to the family. But another horrendous thing that would take place was that while the family was waiting for the forensic team to arrive, Michael's body was still at the bottom of the pool, and they said that they could not help him because they needed to wait for the forensic team to come, and the family was just watching Michael at the bottom of the pool. So as we mentioned earlier, the Razor gang left with everything that was of value, including Michael's vehicle, and Michael's vehicle was located later on, a week or so after the murder, and it was located in an area called Alexandra. Debbie, Michael's sister, was asked to go and identify the vehicle. And while Debbie was with the police and they were dusting for fingerprints, Debbie said that the police said to her that they had really good fingerprints and they were really hopeful about this case. But Michael's family still felt that things weren't being done quickly enough. And eventually, Michael's brother, Alan, would ask his best friend, who was a detective at the time, to try and hurry up this case and to try and work on this case to get his brother's murder solved. Not only that, but Debbie was also asked to identify Michael's body along with her brother Alan. I think that maybe it was too much for Lorna and family, and Debbie and Alan were asked to do it. But Debbie said that when she arrived there, it was horrific. She said that she was given no prep. She knew that she was going to identify her brother's body. She knew that. However, when she got to the morgue, they just kind of pushed her into the room and Michael was just lying there and he had nothing to cover him, nothing to brace this horrific thing that had just happened to them. And she said that it was incredibly traumatic that she had to watch and witness her brother lie there like that. So the family wanted to honor Michael in every way that they could, and they created a trust called Mike Thompson Change a Life Trust. And one of the main areas that Michael's trusts focuses on was something called DNA for Africa, which was run by a lady named Vanessa, who went to school with Michael and Debbie. Small world. But even though amazing things were happening and Michael's trust and Vanessa's DNA for Africa project was really helping South Africa as a whole, the Thompson children were really struggling, especially Michael and Lorna's son. Remember, he had been dragged around by the awful man who hurt him, shouted at him, and forced him around their home to gather everything of value. And he was terrified that this man was still out there. The Razor Gang did not stop and went on to commit horrific crimes. The mean one, who Lorna described as dragging her youngest son around, committed other crimes that were absolutely horrific, vicious, and brutal. He was part of another house break-in with some of the other Razor Gang members, where they went into another home after they had murdered Michael. They went into another home where they then stabbed a mother in front of her children with a screwdriver a couple times in the neck where she was bleeding out, and she really thought that she was going to die. She was then thrown on the floor with her children all in a pile, and her children had to lie there and watch their mother bleeding out, and she was also saying to her children that she thinks she's going to die, and this is absolutely terrifying for children to witness. But also, they had a 17-year-old daughter, and the evil one, or the awful one that Lorna described, he was then shouting around the house that he was HIV positive and he's going to now allegedly spread it to the 17-year-old girl. And what he did was he then dragged her into another room where he then her screaming again and again that he's HIV positive. But I do want to say that this young 17-year-old girl at the time was studying for her matric exams, which are your final year of school exams. And she went on, after taking the drugs to try and prevent HIV from spreading, she then went on to finish matric and also pass with 7 distinctions. And she is an incredible young lady, and it just proves victims of some absolutely horrendous crimes are some of the strongest people in the world. So the Razor Gang went on to commit so many more crimes, and so much DNA was collected in terms of fingerprints, fluids, and at least 5 kits, and it was absolutely terrible for the women and the homes that were being absolutely destroyed by this Razor Gang. So things now started to unfold, and the first arrest actually happened by luck, and that was in 2008 when a young man was showing his girlfriend a gun, and he was showing it to her and he was threatening her because he believed that she was actually cheating on him with another man. So he then pulled out this gun to show, I have a gun and I'm going to kill you if I hear that you actually slept with another man. So police heard about this. They then went up to this young man and said, where's this gun that you are threatening everybody with? So he then gave them the gun willingly, and he said, actually, it's not my gun. I was just trying to be tough. This gun actually belongs to my uncle, and I can show you exactly where I found the gun and who my uncle is. So when police seized this weapon, they also found that the serial number matched Michael Thompson's gun, which was one of the many things they took out of Michael's home. So they then proceeded to follow this young man and take his word for it that he was going to show them where his uncle lived. And they then proceeded to arrest one of the first Razor Gang members named George. The detective assigned to this case was Detective McIntosh, and he was really dedicated in trying to solve this case because he had heard of the absolute destruction that this gang was doing, and he wanted them off the streets. So the police then searched George's home, and Detective McIntosh found so many items that were stolen from homes that they had invaded. And then George said, well, I'm clearly going down for this, and if I'm going down, everybody's going down. So on the 1st of Feb 2008, Sibusiso Mashinini was arrested. Armando Makamo was also arrested shortly after, as well as Bongani Masumpa and Msilovo Tofile. And the last 2 that were left was Raymond Razor Zulu and Tabang Keza. Razor, or Raymond, was eventually arrested in April of 2008, But Tabang was never arrested because he was actually shot down by police and killed in another burglary where he was involved. And during the whole police questioning, Raymond would constantly confess to everything that he did, and he would say to police that he did it, but then Raymond would quickly recant everything that he said, but then confess and then recant. So things were getting really messy. Police were getting really irritated. It was wasting police resources. But Razor would confess and keep the confession that he was the one who shot Michael in the head while he was fighting for his life in the pool, and that he was responsible and guilty for the rape of at least 3 women, as well as a 17-year-old girl. George, who was one of the first arrested, was known as the wet one. He was the one who had the screwdriver inside the pool who was stabbing Michael. He also confessed to the rape of at least 2 women, and George was the one who stabbed the woman in another burglary in her neck, where she then almost died in front of the children. By the way, the mom did recover and she is alive, as far as I could read. Bongani, who was arrested later on, was apparently the nice one. He was known by a lot of people as being really sweet, and he was weirdly caring. He was very gentle in tying ropes. He would also allegedly put pillows underneath some of the victims while they were being forced onto the ground, and he would also put blankets over them. He was not linked to any violence, and he was not linked to any of the rapes. But obviously he was involved in the robberies in some shape or form. Now remember, we spoke about the taxi driver who would get information from domestic workers or nannies or whoever was in his taxi. Ntsilovo was the taxi driver, and he was also the getaway driver. So now that we have a name and face to most of the gang members who were inside the home at the time, when police had these members of the gang with them and incarcerated, the family had to go and identify the people who had done this to them. And when we watch movies or we know of people who have gone to do an identification lineup, it is very much so that the children are protected as much as they can. So usually they would put the children in a separate room and they wouldn't actually put them near the perpetrators. They would give them a book with photos that have been taken where they can point out who they think did it. And as well as the victims who are adults, they are put in a room where the perpetrators can't see them, and then they can point out, feeling safe, that this is the guy, this is the woman who did it, and so on. But that's not exactly what happened, sadly. Lorna did say that when they first went to do the identification, they were split into 2 different dates. The first date, it was very organized, they had everything, the police were kind, they were caring, they told them exactly what they were going to expect, and they felt secure in this time, and they said that they were okay. They managed to do it, and they managed to point out a few people. However, the second time around, when they had to come and do it again, they said that they were immensely traumatized, that they didn't even end up pointing anybody out because they couldn't actually brave themselves or be able to get the courage to do it. So what they did was that they had the perpetrators, or some alleged perpetrators, inside this lineup, and they didn't have any barrier between Lorna and her child and these perpetrators. And what the police asked her to do was, she said that if you know that any of these men here were the ones that were in your home, you need to go up to them and tap them on the shoulder for me. You need to get up so close to the people who had just murdered your husband, beat your child, and tap them on the shoulder for me if that's them. Then all the men mentioned in the gang were denied bail except for Msilovo. He was given bail because the court believed that he was only the getaway driver and he was never in the homes when the incidents occurred. They did believe that he was just sitting in his vehicle. Now, even though the men were in custody, it would still take up to 10 years for a conviction to take place, and that is because the court put Michael's case in the bottom of a pile inside an open room where people could just go in and out and collect and push over files, and eventually his file just dropped to the bottom, open, and the court or the state said that they did not have enough evidence to be able to take this case any further. So while Michael Thompson's case was waiting for trial or waiting to even be put on the court docket, the case of the Razor Gang versus the family that was stabbed in the neck and the 17-year-old daughter who was raped, that case did go to trial, and this trial took place in 2010. And the treatment of these victims with the Razor Gang was horrendous. And I'm not sure why the police thought that this was okay, but when the Razor Gang were all pulled out of the vehicle heading in towards the court, they had to wait to be pulled into court. But not only that, the victims who were going to testify also had to wait to be put into court. So of course, the police on the day decided in their wisdom that they were going to sit the Razor Gang across from the victims in a passageway, in a hallway, in a normal sized hallway, the perpetrators and the victims right opposite each other, with only shackles on the perpetrators and the victims just watching. Apparently, some of the men from the Razor Gang were chirping the young 17-year-old, showing absolutely lewd and crude movements and gestures towards her, and the police just stood by. They may have said one or two things, but they just let it happen, according to some of the articles. And also, the court didn't contact the victims once they had testified. Once they testified, they were told they could leave the court, and they didn't hear about the sentencing at all. The court didn't get back to them. But eventually they heard on the radio that members of the Razor Gang were charged and given very hefty sentences. Based on the radio, Razor was convicted of rape and housebreaking charges and was given 30 years. George was convicted for the attempted murder of the 17-year-old woman's mother and given 20 years. But then it would take another 8 years for Michael's case to eventually get on the court docket. And also, allegedly, the stabbing and how many times Michael had been stabbed was not on the original file because it had somehow been lost in the process. So him being stabbed 14 times by the wet one in the pool was not noted, and eventually the court kind of rolled their eyes and put it at the bottom of like a footnote in his case, noted there that apparently he was stabbed 14 times, right at the back of the case file, right at the bottom. So Bongani, George, Razor, and Nsilovo were to stand trial. But George and Bongani pleaded guilty and turned state witness. The wet one, George, who stabbed Michael 14 times, was given 15 years for housebreaking and 20 years for murder. Bongani, the nice one, was given 10 years for housebreaking only. Then, in 2016, the charges against Nsilovo were dropped as there was not enough evidence to prove that he did anything but sit in the vehicle. But then, Razor pleaded guilty to all charges against him, and he was sentenced in July of 2016 and sentenced to 15 years for armed robbery and a life sentence for murder. Debbie, Michael's sister, truly never stopped fighting for justice for her brother, and she refused on giving up and made sure that he got the justice that he deserved. Their trust does absolutely amazing work, and I'll link it down below if you want to have a look. But let me know what you think of this case down below. I think it is incredibly sad that Michael would technically still be alive. It just shows how something, by being in the wrong place at the wrong time, even though it was Michael's house, can be so catastrophic. But like I said, let me know what you think of this case down below. I hope that you're all doing well. I will see you again next time and have a wonderful weekend further. Bye.